Hello, sir. Good evening. How are you?
Hey, good. Thanks for having me on.
Very welcome. Very welcome. Pleasure to have you on. Now, we connected based on one of your LinkedIn posts. I think you were talking about athletes and you were talking about the future and how people should change their mindset. And that was the original outset for our conversations. Now, to kick it off, if we would have met in 2019, you would have just been, I believe, appointed CEO.
Correct.
Um, How was life then? What was your aspiration? What was going through your mind to say, how am I going to knock it out of the park for 2020?
Well, I had just been named CEO and we had institutional ownership change too. So it was kind of a double change. And we were planning for in 2020 to have the biggest growth in the management firm and the Remington as a private owner operator prior to being sold to Ashford Inc. has been around for almost 53 years. I'm the first CEO that's not a founder. So it was a family business before it became an institutional business. And we thought we were going to co-invest, give key money out, and quite frankly, had the largest growth we've had in all 53 years. I still think we will have exponential growth, but it's been basically a pause button. Is what we've witnessed. And we're starting to see the trees shake as it relates to manager changes as an outcome of the crisis. But yeah, if you told me 5 months ago that I'd be walking into an absolute firestorm, I probably wouldn't have fully appreciated what was in front of us. So it's been quite the learning lesson. And, I'm pretty blessed. So I try to every day count my blessings and take stock in the fact that I get an opportunity to lead an organization through crisis. There's the old saying that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fires. And I think never did that that statement apply more than it does now.
So you would have been on the job, what, 2 weeks? And then the
I was
first,
in the job. Yeah, I was in the job about 6 to 8 weeks before it really started to hit, because we started to see foreign inbound into our we have 10 hotels in California, mostly in the Bay and LA. And we actually have a good bit of Chinese foreign inbound
okay.
at those hotels. I got hotels in Beverly Hills and in Orange County and in the Bay Area all across. And we started to see Chinese travel fall off the second week of January. And so we did, I think it was the third or fourth week of January, right around Alice. We did a forecast adjustment for full year, accounting for Chinese foreign inbound to fall off both West and East Coast, which we thought at the time, we thought RevPAR in the US would be down 30 to 40 basis points because of that lack of inbound.
So in January, you already knew that it's going to
We
be.
knew there would be an impact of Chinese travelers not coming to the U.S., but boy, were we wrong in the magnitude.
Yeah,
I
that's
remember
what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Oh, we were dead wrong. I think I had a ton of private meetings at Alice where we were talking about the potential, and none of us fully appreciated the impact it would have on the U.S. market. It was all around what would happen to FF&E that's coming from China and how that could slow new construction, because a lot of furniture and fixtures come from China for new hotels. So we thought, hey, back half of the year, new construction may slow. We started to talk about how much of the Chinese market represents for Seattle, LA, San Francisco, New York, and how that could have an impact. But boy, did we fully underappreciate how it would come to our shores. And we're seeing that right now. We really, I'm pretty proud of the organization that I think we were first movers in a lot of ways, that we started to do some austerity measures at the back half of February. And then we went into full kind of crisis mode those first few days of March. And by the third week of March, we were seeing the cancellation rate was 300-400% what the new booking rate was. And then it was a race to the bottom from there that really played out over about a 3-week time frame. So I don't think anyone could go back in time and say, hey, at the end of January, that they would fast forward and today in the U.S., what we're witnessing. No, I don't think no one saw it coming, at least that I've talked to.
Now you're in a difficult situation because I believe you have a revenue management background.
I do. I grew up. Yeah, my first multi-property role was I was a regional revenue manager for select service hotels for Intercontinental Hotels.
Wow. Now you are CEO, so you got to look after the company. But I know you're big on culture and people, so you have to look at that front. You equally then have kind of a revenue thinking head or understanding of it. How did you balance those things off in your mind? I mean, you essentially have to choose between bad and worse, right? Did you go progressively? Did you come to work every day and you went just like another step down, or how did you approach it? Because you are very positive and you're coming across very positive throughout that entire experience so far. And I don't want to call it an experience, but how do you maintain that?
I think, it was, first we worked on different scenarios at the 1st of March of how bad we thought it could get. And then I very quickly went to worst case in about a 2-week period. And I struggled there for a couple of days personally. I'd be the first to admit that. I think part of being a good leader is be willing to show vulnerability. And I shared that with my executive committee that I probably had my toughest day at the beginning of April, where it really washed over me that this was going to be long and protracted. It's kind of like went from, I think, what I thought was going to be a vicious battle for 60 days to more of a drawn out war. And so that kind of washed over me. But I think as you're going through it, to back to your original question, how do you balance culture, the reality at hand, and then also trying to be strategic from a revenue perspective? A couple things that we did, tactically and strategically. First and foremost, we knew that at the beginning of March, that cash was going to be very quickly paramount. And so at the beginning of March, we pushed out all our accounts payable to 120 days. We started putting a big focus on accounts receivable, getting monies in. Then very quickly looked at our supply chain and got with our vendors and did a big bulk order of hand sanitizer, cleaning supplies, PPE. So all our hotels have masks and gloves because we bulk ordered them before they ran out. And started to think about, the things that where we could get out in front. I did, unfortunately, I also was one of the first to start doing furloughs, because what we did is we took a 7-day trend line, we matched that against what we saw in China, and then we ran it out. And what you were seeing in Italy was basically they were 14 days ahead. And so it was basic math to say by the end of March, the U.S. was going to be where Italy was or somewhere thereabout. And so by March 10th, I went through and did mass furloughs of the vast majority of my population. And that was about 2 weeks ahead of Marriott, Hilton, most of my competitors. And what that did, it put an extra hardship on my associates, but it helped protect cash for my owners as well as us. And I came out and took a personal pay cut. I forgave part of my bonus from prior year. And I think you have to do those things as a show of solidarity and conjunction, but you have to move fast and you have to be willing to be first. I very much believe in the marketplace. There's an old saying that if you want to make money in the stock market, you either got to be first or you got to be a crook. And I prefer to be the first. And so in the situation, we tried to be out in front. And the way I did it was I got on the phone, and every week I have 2 webcasts. Every Tuesday I do a webcast, so we take an hour of questions, the COO and the head of HR, from all our furloughed associates. They're still part of our family. And I was quick to get on the webcast with them and say, listen, we have to do this. We're going to try and keep you on benefits. You can use your accrued vacation to cover your benefit burden. But this is going to be inevitable, and we're getting out in front. And then I also didn't sit idle. What I showed is that to my population, that I'm advocating through AHNLA and some other lobbyist efforts for federal assistance. So we were very involved in getting unemployment benefits expanded to make sure that all furloughed associates were eligible. In the U.S., they expanded unemployment from 20 to 26 weeks. Unemployment's controlled at the state level, so it varies by state. But the federal government came out as part of the CARES Act and said, hey, we're going to mandate that you're eligible for 39 weeks. They then also added an additional $600 per week for everyone who's unemployed. And so what that meant is that across the U.S., if you make $50,000 or less, you were effectively made whole. So if you're unemployed or furloughed and you make $50,000 or less, you're making equivalent. And then actually, in some cases, a few people are actually making more being unemployed than working. And so I think it was key for us to be first mover, but then you got to communicate to the people why you're doing it.
Yep.
So I outlined, hey, this is going to be 30 to 60 days of incredibly depressed occupancies. Look at Italy, we're 2 weeks behind. We've got to move. And so honest, direct communication. But I didn't just say, hey, that this be a victim. It was call your local politician, advocate for expanded unemployment. And then when some of the CARES Act passed, our population actually saw, hey, they were actually some of the people advocating. Yep. And so it was actually fulfilling for them that, we weren't just sitting idle and being victims of the situation. So I think that's how you balance culture, you balance the profit component. And to the revenue strategy component, some of the last people that I furloughed were revenue management and sales, because
that's very interesting, because in a lot of other companies, you see that sales was essentially the first one to go. Then we kind of saw.
And I didn't do that. And I've actually kept all my corporate sales payroll is still working. And I did that because first off, I didn't at first, the first couple of weeks, we didn't know, we thought, we knew the second half of March was going to be horrific and all of April. What I now know is May is going to be only slightly better than April, and June will only be slightly better than May. And so it's going to be worse than people think. And everybody have been slow and underappreciative of how long. And so we kept all revenue management on through March to try and manage through the crisis and mitigate and doing forecast. And then we had to draw that down at the end of March. So I furloughed a lot of the field operations first. And then sales, I've really tried to hold on resources. And I've kept every DVP of sales working and doing proactive sales for the second half, because that's what's going to give us lifeblood to get people back to work. And they've also been the people who have negotiated a few hotels that are sold out. So I've got 10% of the portfolio right now that's running 70% occupancy.
Whoa.
And it's all, we're housing, our Marriott Durham in Raleigh, North Carolina is 100% sold out. We're housing the homeless. The city's paying us. They paid us a month in advance. My DVP of sales directly negotiated it with the city. We're one of the primary hotels for nurses and doctors in Manhattan at our Embassy Suites on 36th Street in Times Square. And we're running 65% occupancy, all medical providers. And so, we wouldn't have had all that had we not kept sales going. And I think that's been a big mistake of a lot of our competitors is one, furloughing sales too much. Albeit the majority of my sales force is furloughed, but we still have a decent amount working. And then not trying to think about, how do you position yourself different, and just worrying about the liability. I have a lot of competitors who didn't want to take business because they said, well, what about the liability if somebody gets COVID? And I've made the argument, well, that's why you have to enhance your cleaning policies and your mitigation policies, because this thing isn't going anywhere. and we're going to have tons of guests over the coming months. They're going to have COVID-19, and you got to be training now to deal with that.
So that was my next question. How do you go to work right now? I.e., what does your day look like on a motivational basis for the team that is left? And B, kind of like, I see it the same. You have an opportunity to reset the switch and really build out some processes much stronger, maybe think of new ways of how things can be done. But is that really enough to keep you going every day? Like where do you spend most of your time right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. It has changed through the last couple of weeks. And I think I'm a big believer in, if you look at very successful people, especially athletes and entrepreneurs, they're very regimented. It's all about daily discipline. Mm-hmm. And the slight improvements you can make each day add up, and it's compound interest. So just like James Clear wrote in Atomic Habits, which is a New York Times bestseller that I'd recommend anybody to read, your habits are you. And so I wake up at the same time I did when I went in the office. I get up and shower.
Not one of those 4:30 a.m. in the morning people.
No. I hate the early morning. I'm a midnight owl, so I'm up till 1 and I get up at 7. So, you won't see me up before 6:30 unless it's Christmas and my kids beat me to get open for the presents. I'm actually the opposite. I'm a night owl, so I'll be working at midnight a lot of nights.
Okay.
Which this time work suits me good. I'm right in my wheelhouse. But no, and I get up, and at 9 a.m., because I'm not a morning person, we have a Zoom executive committee meeting every day for 7 days a week. Now I try to honor if people, I've got different religions that work for me. And so if they're, a Jewish Orthodox and honor, they want to attend the Saturday, or somebody's, got a church service to attend on Sunday. So we work through that. But I'm on there 7 days a week. And then on the Saturday and Sundays, I take time for family. But then throughout the day, there's just different meetings. I have some that are set. So I do the Tuesday, Friday webcast. So that kind of bookends the beginning of the week and the end of the week. And, I've every week I update our cash forecast for the next 30, 60, 90. And I'm intimately involved in that, so that we're managing cash to a fine detail, getting on the phone with vendors, renegotiating, pushing AP, getting on the phone with owners, talking through working capital. So it's my world has changed a lot. My world was 50% of my time before COVID-19 was business development, growing the management platform. That is probably right now only about 5 or 10%. And then managing through the crisis is about 70%. And then 20% is strategic planning coming out of it. And then every week that goes by, more strategic planning. I mean, I'm working on some press releases and some customer marketing centered around our cleanliness procedures, about our kind of best-in-class cash management as we've gone through. And so I'm already thinking about, not to take advantage of hardship, but we've done better than most, I think, and we're going to benefit. And so I'm going to be doing a lot of marketing coming out of this, of how we operated better for our owners, our associates, and for guests.
Now, you said what I like is you're not calling it the new normal. You're sticking to the managing through crisis, right? Do you see a point in time where people lose hope in the next couple of weeks because there's another extension? I mean, we talked about it just earlier off record, that Singapore just extended the lockdown, for example, for another 4 weeks, right? Do you see something like that happening? How's it gonna stretch?
There's already cases of that. I think there's already cases where you've had municipalities extend, and depression rates are up, suicide rates are up, domestic, at least in the U.S., domestic assaults are up. And so I've seen it on the morale of my associates. That's why I talk to them twice a week, every week. It's iterative. I talk about social distancing emotional connection. So don't disconnect emotionally. And that's where I came up with the concept of day zero in the post that I made, because everyone I talked to were having a false sense of hope. Hope is a great thing, but if you have an unrealistic expectation and then you get to that milestone and then it resets on you,
it just breaks you down.
It breaks you down further. And not many people, it's like a re-injury. If you blow your knee out and then you do it a second, a third, a fourth time, every iterative time, it becomes emotionally harder. And so what I told my team is, don't set yourself up for that failure. This is a new, unprecedented, and we don't know. Now, I do think in the US, we've bottomed out in occupancy. I think the first 15 days of April, that has happened across the US. And it may be there's pockets of worse hardship to come because you'll have flare-ups and new hot zones. But I think April as a whole will be the worst if we don't have a reoccurrence in the fall. So from now through the balance of the summer, I think the worst, we're in it. But I think by human nature and as a manager, it's a delicate balance of setting up realistic expectations and then just showing progress. And that's where I talk about this day zero, not day one, because day one indicates, well, the second day is going to be better than the third. Well, at day zero, you're back to square one.
Yep.
And you just got to, hey, I got to reopen a hotel. It's like going back and doing pre-opening. And that may be the reality for weeks, maybe a couple months. And you got to have the resilience and the, to do that. And, I think the mindset is everything in this situation. And if you think all of a sudden you're going to get to May 1st or June 1st and occupancy is going to come rushing back and life's going to get back to totally new normal or prior normal, you are going to be set up for failure.
So let's talk about the life after, right?
Yeah.
And three aspects are going through my mind all the time. One is how will the assets fare in the future, or how will an asset in the future look from not right now everybody's changing their assets, but will there be a shift in thinking of design? I think the second part is around, will we see things like revenge travel? And I find America is very similar, the US is very similar to Australia from a perspective of domestic tourism. That you have a very strong domestic tourism because you have a vast country. So that's the second part, the phases of how we're seeing that coming back. And I think the last part is, what is going to happen to all of those workers afterwards, right? How have we changed the way we live? It's a bit beforehand, you could do Zoom. I mean, let's say it this way. There was never a reason for you to not have Zoom calls every morning or twice a week in the last 5 years. That was always possible. But now we were forced into that new reality where we see it's actually, to a certain extent, working. So what are your thoughts on that? Because that's where I think some of the population, how you call that, will think about. And then your owners will most probably want recommendations on that. And then for yourself, from a business perspective, it's about delivering value to the shareholders.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think you're on to a lot of good ideas. I think occupancy in general in the U.S. will take longer to come back than people anticipate. I don't think we see mid-30s occupancies in the U.S. until July. You look at China, they're now in the low 30s. I don't think we see that until after the 4th of July in the U.S.
But is that revenge travel?
I think it is partly revenge travel. That's the way to call it. I think, July and August will be heavily carried by, the domestic American traveler consumer wanting to get out. How much consumer confidence suffers between now and then with unemployment exploding over 20% is the unknown. If you're unemployed, are you really going to go take a revenge vacation? Probably not, unless you're a high net worth individual who's been furloughed. So that's a unknown. And then you'll start to see business travel come back, I think, in Q3. But I think the things that we just don't know are the long-term impacts. The Google and the Amazons and the Facebooks of the world, did they just simply say, we're not going to, have 20 or 30% of our travel budget forever? I think there's a likely outcome that technology companies and some companies just do away with some of their corporate travel for at least a couple years. I mean, Facebook just came out today, or in the last few days, excuse me, and banned any associate being in a meeting or an event that's more than 50 people through June of 2021. So, you're not having a Facebook conference, that's for sure. So I think there is some of this that is life altering and is permanent. I do think travel in general is very resilient. We've seen that through the times. We've had wars, we've had Vietnam, we have had oil crises, we've had terrorism, 9/11, we've had financial collapse, and travel. I think in the next 10 to 15 years, we in the U.S. will continue to see new watermark highs in occupancy. But how that'll be achieved will be different. I do think that groups and meetings, until they have a vaccine, will continue to be like sporting and music and festivals. It will just suffer because no one wants to be in a high density environment. So, the 1,000-room Gaylord Hotel, I really wouldn't want to have to manage that because I don't know how you fill that box until there's a vaccine. So I think groups and meetings and banquets and kind of the catering side of the business is going to be a lagging effect, whereas you'll see transient demand come back in the U.S. You'll see leisure and business start to rebound in Q3, maybe even have a decent rebound in Q4, not year-on-year positive, but if there's not a reoccurrence in the fall and you have an election, some renewed sense of confidence. And then I think what happens to other segment demands like group, foreign inbound is totally contingent on a vaccine and tamping this thing down long term. And I think the gateway markets in the U.S. are actually going to be the markets that struggle the most because a lot of their ADR comes from events and high density events that drive rate on compressed nights. And so the attendance of those conferences is going to be way down. If you're a hotel in San Francisco and you get $200 rate premium when Moscone is sold out on a huge convention, those conventions aren't going to be sold out for the next year and a half. Las Vegas is another market that suffers probably. Nobody wants to be in a casino with thousands of strangers. So I think those are the types of things that short term are going to be really suffering, even as leisure transient, business transient comes back.
So what does it mean for assets?
I think asset value is depressed for a period of time. I think HVS has it right that, asset values probably in the short term are depressed by 30%, maybe 35, maybe 40 in extreme scenarios, and that it's going to take asset values in the U.S. 4 to 5 years to recover. I think that's probably right. I think RevPAR takes non-inflation adjusted 3 to 4 years to recover. And the unknown, the two things that I have real curiosity about is, one, does this lead to more automation in hotels? Automating front desk more, automating housekeeping, and there's a perceived safetiness to that the customer likes. Mobile check-in's a good example. I don't have to go to the front desk and interact with the person. I don't have to touch the doorknob. This technology providing me safety and ease of use. I think this could actually be a catalyst for mobile check-in to become far more widespread. As an example of automation, I think this will.
Do you really think that people want to step away from that after a lockdown of being deprived of that?
I think at least in the short to midterm, long term, possibly not. I think, for the next 6 to 12 months, you could see mobile key adoption go up, where hotels that have it available, it's more readily available. And then I think this is going to change food and beverage options. I think until there's a vaccine, your buffet lines are done. You're not going to see a buffet food. You're not going to go to Embassy Suites and see the full breakfast offering in an Embassy by Hilton, where you got the eggs, omelet stations, and all that. There's not. First, it's a high cost, and you're not. It's an easy thing to cut out. And then from a sanitation perspective, it's going to get wiped out. So I think breakfast offerings at hotels is one area you could say are modified until there's a vaccine, and maybe forever.
But do you think we will redesign our asset then to think through those scenarios?
I think you will. I think there'll be some space that gets repurposed.
Yep.
So there's a renovation being planned. Somebody thinks through the food concept differently. I think this will be an opportunity for some hotels to reinvent room service. Mm-hmm. So, for the next year, people are going to be more apt to eat in their room when they're traveling.
Yeah.
And, they may see that as safer. So,
with that safety in mind, that means we might need less people to do the same jobs, and that went into your automation part. That's a bit of a grim outlook, no? Or are there other jobs that will now take more priority so people can be, I don't want to say people can be repurposed, but in the tone of conversation that we're talking about repurposing assets to reskill all of those coming back?
I think on the unfortunate outcome is that we have witnessed if you treat a hotel as a per capita, on a per hotel basis, we will not see the employment levels that we saw at the end of 19 possibly ever again. I think how we operate hotels now, the overall jobs in U.S. hotels will continue to grow because the number of hotels will grow, overall demand will grow, but on a per hotel basis. Now the exception to that is the labor unions in the U.S. are becoming more and more aggressive. So I think this is going to create a battle of the model, and are the unions going to try to become more common in the U.S., whereas if you look at us versus look at Europe, we're far less organized labor versus other countries. And so I think that's going to be one of the outcomes of this, that union is going to possibly become more common because they're trying to protect jobs that become automated, or the hotel industry is changing. But I think ultimately in the U.S., particularly in the states that you don't necessarily have pro-labor politics or pro-union, that you will see we will never see the number of employees at a hotel that we saw pre this. I just don't see it.
So what positive can we take out of the situation, right? There must be some things where we see, actually, we realize we can do this better, or we can do that better. And how can somebody now, I don't want to say prepare for coming back, because again, then you're setting some hopes and you might set yourself up for failure. But how can I now start to look at myself and say, okay, how can I now, based on what is experienced right now, get better what I do, and equally learn new skills so that I become more, in dating world, attractive for the future of work?
Well, I think, first we've learned that we can react quickly and can survive a near-death experience. I mean, that's what the U.S. hotel industry is going through right now, that this too shall pass, and the vast majority of us will survive this, and we'll come out the other side. And so I don't foresee, but you never know, another black swan event like this that is this severe. And so it trains you to understand your limits. Yeah. And so that's a good outcome and learning experience. I think it will force innovation, which I think is a good thing. I would argue the hotel industry in general has just not innovated enough. Yes, we still want human to human connection, but there's so many ways that we could have innovated faster. I mean, look at in-room entertainment and how, some of us have been, and this is going to force the hand of innovation in a lot of cases, which I think will be good for hotels because it'll allow even more differentiation versus short-term rental. So whereas I think Airbnb and some of those were becoming more and more of a danger for hotels, I actually think this will create some separation where this actually helps hotels long-term, and it'll force them to innovate. And I think the other positive I would say is that we'll still hit another all-time high in the U.S. in occupancy in the next 10 years. And so once we get through this crisis and they have a vaccine, we'll be off to the races. We had in the U.S., I can't speak to other countries, we had expense inflation of about 4 to 5% the last 2 years. And RevPAR was barely growing. So this will cause expense deflation. I mean, look at what happened with oil. Energy prices are going to fall out the bottom. So in some positive, our expenses are going to come way down. So that's a good thing. Energy cost is going to go down. And so that'll be a good adverse outcome of this. But hey, I made a bet the other day with somebody. I am absolutely 95% positive that the U.S. will hit another all-time high in occupancy in the next 10 years. And so I think for those of us in travel, that's an exciting thing.
Now, do you have to keep your positivity up? Do you have a mantra every morning that you tell yourself when you look in the mirror before you go to work to say, go get him? Or
no, I don't. I get my energy from my team. And so, I kind of show up kind of grumpy at that 9 a.m. because I actually have my most energy at night. It's just the way my chemistry works. I've tried the routine of working out in the morning to get energy, and no, I just I show up kind of grumpy to the 9 a.m. Zoom, and by the end of it, I'm in a good mood. So I just make sure I make that meeting, and then the rest of the day falls in place.